Well, we're so glad that you chose to be here with us today. As I kick off the message, I do want to say hi again to those of you online, our Lusby campus, and those here at the Leonardtown campus. Hey, I'm actually going to start the message off today differently than I usually do. Usually I kind of start off by pointing to a logo and saying, this is the message, this is the title, but today I can't start off by telling you the title, because if I told you the title ahead of time, it might offend you. And so if I don't give you any context, that you might be offended. And then as I was working on the message, I realized it doesn't matter whether you know the title or not, you might be offended anyway. So I'm just going to dive right in, but I wanted to hold it off and not have you be offended in the first 60 seconds by the title of the message. And this whole kind of thing came along because a couple of weeks ago, something happened. Did any of you know that the midterm elections happened no one? Okay. I don't know about you, but like a week and a half ago when it all ended, like when all the negative ads ended, when all the debates ended, when all the pundit and talking heads that talk to me and talk to you, when that all ended, I breathed a sigh of relief. Did anyone else just go, yeah, I'm glad that's okay? See, I'm not the only person that went, phew, I'm just glad that over. But listen, as I kind of watched that whole process, I had this observation and I came up with this thing that I go, oh, this is what this is, and I bet you probably already kind of understand this, but like I discovered this, and this is kind of my opening thought. Listen, our culture is hostile and divided. Oh, it's okay. Smile. If you ate a breath mint, turn to your neighbor and just wave at him. It's good, right? It's good. But like, listen. Our culture is hostile and divided. We're hostile and divided politically. Nod your head and say amen. We're hostile and divided socially. Shake your head and say amen, right? We're hostile and divided economically. Shake your head and go, yep, that's true, right? We're divided, hostile and divided racially. This is all a true statement. I mean, listen, you can't go anywhere today and try to have a conversation about politics or social or economics or race. You can't go anywhere and have a conversation without people literally like losing their mind, right? Because as soon as you start a conversation about this, right, like people begin to like talk about every issue in absolutes and extremes. And then all of a sudden, everyone and everything has a label specifically designed to create this explosive emotional response. Listen, I've experienced it. I bet you've experienced it. I mean, maybe you saw this at work during lunch. Maybe you saw this at the gym, at the water cooler. Maybe it was at your last family gathering, or maybe it was a post on social media. Someone starts a conversation about one of these issues, right? Someone starts a conversation about one of these issues. And at first, it's just a little bit of back and forth, and then it escalates and it escalates and it escalates, and then soon it's a heated argument. And people turn and walk away. They're angry, they're frustrated, and they're hurt. And a simple conversation ends up damaging a relationship. Now, if I was honest, this has happened to me. And I said, well, I wonder if it happened to me, if it's happened to anyone else. And so this title of the message today is less for you and more for me, but we're going to kind of put up the title of the message, How Not to Be a Jerkface. Right? Like, listen, these things are going to happen. And so, listen, we really just need to be able to like go, how do I not be a jerk face? As you and I try to engage a culture that is hostile and divided, how do we not be a jerk face? But as soon as we begin to talk about this, there's a familiar question. And this question is something that I believe all of us begin to ask as soon as we talk about it. And here's the question we begin to ask. How did we end up like, right? Come on. I'm not the only one. I bet we've all said, how have we ended up as a culture and a civilization? How have we ended up so hostile? How have we ended up so divided? How did we get here? And here's the thing about the answer to that question. It's really simple, but none of us ever really want to say it out loud. And so today I might be the most unpopular person in the room, okay? So here's how we ended up there. I'm going to put it up here on the screen. We believe there's an enemy, and they're what's wrong with the world, whoever they is. Because everyone in this room has got a they, right? We believe there's an enemy, and they're what's wrong with the world. So if they, whoever they are, could just be like, come on. Like, I'm not the only person that goes, man, if everyone would just be like, then the world would be a better, right? I mean, this is how it starts, myself included. This is how it starts. I go, listen, I'm not the brightest guy, but like, I think I'm right for a reason, right? Like, you think you're right for a reason. You don't go, listen, I'm a moron. I'm pretty sure everything I think is right is probably wrong, so I should just listen. Like, no one ever thinks that, right? We all think we're right, and so we go, listen. Since I'm right, if everyone would just think like me, act like me, vote like me, do like me, the world would be the place that I want it to be. And so whenever we have conversations, and by the way, this is free, you don't have to put anything. Conversations are supposed to be like a ping pong match. You share, back and just free for all of you, back and forth. Don't hog that thing, right? But if you have a conversation, and this is what leads it to, when you and I try to have conversations, our conversations are never really about listening, because we're right. Our conversations are never really about understanding, because we're right. Our conversations are never really about dialogue, because and if everyone could just see how I was, then the world would be the place that I wanted to be. Which leads us to a truth that I've experienced, you've experienced. Listen, you didn't need to come to church or watch this video or listen online. Listen, we've all experienced it. And then if you're following along, it certainly leads us to this truth right here. Hostility and division aren't overcome by shouting louder and arguing better. Because if we were really all honest, maybe not you, maybe me. Maybe this was just for me today. But I have discovered that hostility and division aren't overcome by shouting louder and arguing better. But if we're really honest, most of us believe this is how we're going to create change. If we just shout louder than other people, if we just argue better than other people, we will somehow create the change that we wish for. But here's the problem. That when you and I do the thing that leads to hostility, you're not going to get a different result. What has led to hostility is that people shout louder and try to argue better. And if you do the very thing that leads to hostility, it's not going to undo it. Because there's a principle that is familiar to every relationship. Listen, this principle works regardless of whether you're American, whatever continent, how much money you have. Listen, if you're a parent, if you're married, listen, I'm about to give you some advice, man. This one, if you were here just for this, it would be a win, right? But listen, here's why. There's a familiar principle of why we end up here. And I'm going to put it up on the screen, and it goes like this. Listen, being in attack or defense mode always creates Listen, when you and I are in attack mode or defense mode, it always creates a fight or flight response, because there's no safe space for dialogue. As soon as someone begins to attack or someone goes to the mode, our radar goes on, ding, 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 incoming, right? And then we think that no one notices that we're in DEFCON 5, right? And our breathing goes up, our chest sticks out, we get loud, we get puffy, we're not even listening to what they're saying, we're coming up with our response, and then so someone can tell, and then they just go, no, either they're going to attack you back, or they're going to leave the conversation, because when you're in attack mode or defense mode, and you know this, if you got any married people in the house, that just doesn't work. How's that working for you? Bad. Right? We understand this. When we're in attack or defense mode, it always creates a fight or flight, because there's no safe ground to say that, listen, you have dignity and I'm willing to hear what you have to say. And it puts them in flight or fight mode, so there's no safe space. And so we're left with a pretty good question, which is, what is my goal? Represent my opinions. Now, I want to stop here for a little bit. Let me finish. Represent Jesus' care. This is going to offend you because it offended me. Maybe you've never done this, but I know I've done this. I sometimes try to represent Jesus' care as my opinions. Maybe I'm the only person that's ever done this. But because I believe I'm right, and I love Jesus, well then my opinions, Jesus authorizes my opinions, and everyone should just think and believe the way I do. And oftentimes we have conversations where we are trying to say, I'm representing Jesus' care, but we're not really representing Jesus' care. We just wrap up our opinions in that so that we can tell people our opinions and then say God's on our side. When the last time I checked, God's not on anyone's side. Everyone's supposed to be on his side. Can I get an amen? Y'all might have missed that. God's not on anyone's side. We should be on his side. He's not on the left or the right, in the middle. He's the King of Kings. He's at the top of the chain. And he said one day every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. Now, when I give a message like this, people begin to make statements, and I want no one to hear this. Listen, I'm not saying you can't have an opinion. I'm not saying that. No one leave here and go, my pastor said I couldn't have an opinion. That's not what I said. Everyone's allowed to have opinion. I don't want you to leave here and say, my pastor said that I couldn't engage in culture. That's not what I'm saying. I actually think we should be engaged in culture. I'm not telling you to disengage with culture. And please don't hear me say not to be a voice for justice. I'm not saying any of those things. What I am saying is how we engage in conversation really, really, really matters. Because how we engage a hostile and divided culture has two problems. If we try to shout louder and argue better, we don't get heard. If we try to shout louder and argue better, we're not going to get heard. And when we try to shout louder and argue better, not only do we not get heard, we just add to the hostility and division that is a dysfunctional cycle that ends up right where we're at. And so you and I have a pretty important question today. How? How do we engage a culture? How do we engage a culture that's so hostile and divided politically, socially, and economically, and racially? There's so much to unite us in Jesus here as a community. We could be a light to our community. So how do we do this? Now here's kind of the good news, and it's kind of the sad news. The good news is you and I aren't the first people to deal with this. And the sad news is people, ever since communities been formed, have been dealing with hostility and division since communities started to form. God knew that once you get a bunch of people together with different ideas and different opinions, that there would be division and hostility. God knew this would be a problem. He's addressed it. As a matter of fact, Jesus himself addresses this very issue. Because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what I think or what I say. It really matters what Jesus has to say. And so in one of Jesus' most famous messages called the Sermon on the most people, even if you didn't go to church, you've heard of the Sermon on the Mount, right? Jesus is speaking to a crew of people. He's got some of his disciples. There's thousands of people gathered there. And Jesus is saying, listen, if you want to experience life, here's God made life. Here's how you should do it. And he begins to speak, and we catch kind of the eyewitness account in the Gospel of Matthew of Jesus speaking. And he says these words, if a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Now that means nothing to anyone in this room, right? Like you're like, no soldier's going to ask me to carry their gear. And, we're so patriotic, we're like, I'd carry it for him anyway, right? Like, this makes no sense to us today. But in this day, this might have been one of the most offensive statements that Jesus could make. Because Jesus was Jewish. He lived in the nation of Israel, and Israel had been conquered by a foreign army, the Roman army, and they had devastated and they'd done horrible things to them. And part of the military kind of rule of once you were occupied, if a Roman soldier asked you to carry their gear, you were legally required to carry it for a mile. And Jesus comes along and said, you know that enemy that conquered you? You know the enemy that you hate, the enemy that did all those horrible things? When they asked you to carry your gear, you don't just carry it for 1 mile, you carry it for... To which I'm sure people were like, what? You fell and bumped your head, Jesus. Why in the world would I carry it? But I say, love your enemies. Not my words, Jesus' words. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Man, if church people could stop being so worried about what they're not getting and all blah, 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 and we just prayed for people and we just treated them the way Jesus told us to, I think we could create the kind of change that we hope to see. He doesn't stop there, though. Jesus keeps on going. He says this, he says, in that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father. If you want to be children of God, don't be mean, don't be hostile, don't be divisive. Love your enemy, pray for them, do good to them, and then you'll be like your Father in heaven. For he gives the sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. See, the problem is we think we're just. You're not just, I'm not just, we're just forgiven. Anyway, he continues this. If you only love those that love you, what reward is for that? Even the corrupt tax collectors do that much. And he goes on to say, if you're kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. And I bet the audience was a lot like the audience right now. They're probably, oh, I don't like this. I mean, Jesus, all of a sudden, they're like, yes, Jesus, you feed the 5,000. You're so awesome. You heal people. And then he says, you know what? When a soldier tells you to carry their gear, I don't want you to carry it for 1 mile. I want you to carry it for 2, and I want you to be happy about it. You see, Jesus reveals something that we all know. Listen, I don't care how good of a human you are. We're all broken, so every human will have an enemy. That's why Jesus doesn't try to identify the enemy. He says, if you're human, you're broken, you're going to have an enemy. So when you have a so-called enemy, you need to love them. And then Jesus goes on, he says, listen, not only do you need to love them, you need to treat them kindly. Not just kindly, you need to treat them better than you treat your BFF, which is confusing to me. Like, think about it. Have you ever helped a good friend? And I'm not talking about like the friend that you kind of acquaintance, they only call you when they need help moving or their car fixed, but like a really good friend. And have you ever gone to help a good friend, and then when you kind of have done helping them, they go, that's good, I don't need any more. And you go, no, you're my friend, I'll stay to the end. And Jesus says, that's how you're supposed to treat your enemy. You're supposed to go the extra mile. And then Jesus drops a bombshell. Jesus says, if you are only kind to people who look like you, think like you, act like you, and vote like you, then you're just like them. Jesus' words. If you're mad, get mad at him. He says, listen, if you only treat people who you know are in your circle and that you like, and you treat them kindly, and they're the only people you treat kindly, then you're no better than them. Then here's the kicker. Jesus is trying to infer a simple truth. There's only one person that we can change. It's the person in the mirror. There's only one person that I can change. There's only one person that you can change. It's the person we see in the mirror. If we want our culture to be less hostile and divided, then the change needs to start with me, not them. So this morning, I'd like to make 3 brief observations that I think come from this. And here's the first one we're going to put up here on the screen, and it's this. We can love and accept people without agreeing with them. Shocking, I know. I know this is like mind-boggling for some of you. Like, listen, people you disagree with aren't the enemy. And here's the problem. When we disagree with people, we typically dehumanize them. And here's what we mean. We go, if I was them, I would never think like that or act like that. But you weren't born in the circumstances. You don't have their makeup. You don't know their story. So you dehumanize a person when you say, I would never think like that or never act like that, because you never lived their story. They become less than if you're not willing to love them and accept them. Listen, we can disagree, but we can still love and accept people. We don't have to agree with people's behaviors. We don't have to agree with people's beliefs, but we can love and accept them. We can say that you're welcome and that you're loved and you have human dignity. That's why at SouthPoint, it's our core number 2 value. Everyone is welcomed and loved. Everyone is given dignity and respect because they're made in the image of God. Regardless of whether they fall on this side or that side or the middle, and whatever that means for whoever gives those labels, we can love and accept them without agreeing with them. And here's what just blows my mind when it comes to church folk. Do you know what the worst things that the religious elite had to say about Jesus? You know the title they gave Jesus? He was the friend of... Jesus' worst name. I mean, the Pharisees and the religious people, they couldn't curse, right? And they couldn't use God's name in vain. So the worst put down they could come up with Jesus was, you're a friend of? You hang out with those people. I don't know who those people were, but he apparently hung out with those people. And it's amazing that his followers don't even do what Jesus did. Jesus showed up and he didn't agree with the things that he was forgiving and healing and speaking to. He didn't agree with everything, but he loved them and he accepted them. He didn't dehumanize it. He saw them as children made in the image of God. And I wonder how different our communities and schools and our neighborhoods would be if followers of Jesus said, listen, I don't necessarily agree with everything that you believe or think or act, but I choose to love and accept you. I choose to treat you as a human being made in the image of God, regardless of how you treat me. Regardless of what happens to me, I am not responsible for that. I am only responsible for how I respond. Which leads me to the second observation, which I find, when I wrote this down, I was like, man, like no one's going to like it. People are going to hate me. But I think this is so true. We're going to come up to the second one is my circle insulated or integrated? I want to ask you an honest question. Do you have any friends? I mean friends that you can talk to and that know you, that vote differently than you. I'm not asking for out loud answers. That's between you and Jesus. I want to know, do you have any friends that have different skin color than you? Do you have any friends that maybe speak a different language than you? Do you have any friends that were born on a different continent than you? Do you have friends who maybe behave differently than you? Because here's what I've noticed about church in general, and I'm not trying to say you're church people or church people, but I'm saying, listen, if we were really honest, churches are typically insulated people, right? Right, I'm going to go to church with people who look like me, act like me, vote like me, talk like me, think like me. I want to send my kids to schools with people that look like me, talk like me, vote like me. I'm going to hang out in circles with people who talk like me, look like me, think like me, vote like. And so we're insulated, and I just want to know, are we doing what Jesus did? Because the last time I checked, Jesus wasn't insulated. Jesus left the comforts and convenience of heaven, and he came down to a busted and dirty and broken earth, and he hung out with the least of these. And I just wonder, is your circle insulated or integrated? And listen, this is why this is so important. Relationship will reveal unseen perspectives. When you're in a relationship with somebody who is different than you will get to see life from a perspective that you never ever would have been able to do if you weren't in that relationship, because you didn't grow up like that. You don't understand their experience. But when you have that relationship, it reveals an unseen perspective that you would have never ever had. Let me give you an example. I've had so many conversations with people about kind of patriotism and the police and race and all this stuff. And I'm amazed at what people say. And the reason I'm amazed is because I have good friends that are police officers. And I've heard their stories, and I've heard the things that they go through. And sometimes I hear people speak, and I go, that's unique because I have friends, and so I have a different perspective. I have friends, Elwood, who's one of my good friends who was a pastor here at SouthPoint, person of color. I've sit and listened in justice meetings with people of color, and I've heard their experience as Americans and what it's like to be black in a country where, whether you believe it or not, racism still exists. And hear their perspective. And I understand, because my circle isn't insulated, all of a sudden I have a perspective that I would have never had because I have relationships, and all of a sudden it's not an issue. These are human beings. And when we meet people who are human beings, all of a sudden it's not an issue, it's a person. And it's a person who has a story, and their story matters deeply to God. At some point, listen, I just need to say this. I'm just getting on my little soapbox here for a second. Come on, man. Rarely does the truth live in extremes. I will not let the media divide me or my family. The only people that win are the people in power in the media when we're divided. They get to sell us an enemy. Right? And the people in power then just want to have an enemy, so you'll join them. You see, I believe I can love my country. I have friends who've served in the military, and I am patriotic, and I love my country, and I'm thankful. And I also realize my country is flawed. I can look at my country with my patriotism and go, yes, I love my country, but it's flawed. We have some justice issues. We have some policing issues. We have some race issues. And I can be on both ends and go, that's okay. I don't have to pick a side because I'm on the side of people. And that happens when your circle isn't insulated. The problem is that you can never ever grow and you can never ever learn if you're only in the same circles. That's why we believe in small groups. And I want to encourage you, whether you're a person of color or not, or diverse, or whatever, please get in a small group because you bring value. Small groups is where we get together with people who maybe don't all have the same things, but we can realize that we all struggle. Which leads me to the third thing. Am I seeking to understand or to be heard? Man, I stink at this. I'm just going to not lie. I'm just going to tell you the truth for it to be on record forever. I'm really bad. I love to talk. It's really good in my profession, but really bad for my relationships. I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation, but usually in a conversation, I'm thinking about what I want to say, not what the person is saying. When we're in conversations, here's what I discovered. If you truly love people, the greatest gift that you can give them is to listen. To really seek to understand where they're coming from. And I wonder, in our conversations at the gym, in our conversations at the water cooler, at our conversations on social media, are we seeking to understand people or do we just want to be heard? Because there's a difference. There's tons of people that want to be heard. But the real question is am I seeking to understand? You know what's amazing? There's only been one human who's ever walked on the planet that deserved not to listen to anyone. It was Jesus. He already knew everything. He's all-knowing. He's God in the flesh. He's God's son. He showed up on the earth. He was the only one that as soon as people came up and talked to him, he could go, I already know all about you. And I already know, not only do I know about you, I know how to solve your problems. And here's what's amazing about Jesus. Listen, I've read all the eyewitness account of Jesus, and what is mind-boggling to me is when people run up to Jesus and say, Jesus, Jesus, help me. Jesus never says, oh, I got just what you need. You know what Jesus does? Jesus always asks a question. What is it that you want? What is it that you're seeking? What do you want? Jesus always starts the conversation off with because he knows that dignity is given through understanding and seeing someone. And I wonder how many times in our conversations are we looking to see the person we're talking to? Mainly in our conversations, I just want to be seen. I just want you to know how smart I am and how right I am. And how the world would just be a better place if you just did what I wanted when I wanted. It would just be much easier for me. We laugh because that's us, right? Instead of going, no, I need to see them. If we want our culture to not be hostile and divided, if I had to sum it all up, I'd sum it up this way. People aren't moved by arguments. Can I get an amen? People aren't moved by how right you are. They're moved by how they're treated. There was someone who once said, people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. And I have never found a much truer statement. You really don't care how much someone knows until you know that they care for you. You don't care how right they are unless you know that they genuinely care. And so the question is, well, then how do we treat people? This is what I love about God, Jesus, and the Bible. The Bible is pretty clear. Like, listen, how we treat people is so simple. And I'm going to do something a little bit unique. I typically don't do this, but I felt like this was such an important thing. We're going to go through a couple of verses just from the New Testament where God is speaking to a group of people, and often churches that were made up, that were diverse racially, they were diverse socioeconomically, they were diverse economically. They had the same issues that we're running into today, and they speak into this. And here's the first one I love. It's James. We're going to put it up here on the screen. I believe it's James 1:19. It says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to and slow to become angry. I literally had a boss one time who was a Christ follower at a church that I went to, and he had given me this job, and I was low and he was high, and I was at a meeting, and after the meeting he pulled me aside and he looked me straight in the eye and goes, Matt, goes, yes. He goes, how many ears do you have? I go, 2. And he goes, how many mouths do you have? I go, 1. He said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth so you could listen twice as much as you talk. Got it? You laughing at me? Is that true for you? Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak. We should be listeners. Going on to the next verse. Ephesians, always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Go on to the next one. You are the people of God, loved and chosen of his own. So then you must clothe yourselves with compassion, with kindness, with gentleness and patience. Go to the next one. Let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. Let's go to the next one. Remind people to be subject to the rules and authorities, to be obedient, ready to do whatever is good, and slander, to be peaceable and considerate, and always to be gentle toward everyone. Next one. 1 Peter, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with, and if we want to know how we're supposed to act, just look at what we've looked at. I've actually made a list. Go to the list. Do we have the list there? Humble. At some point, we all have to admit something. You know what? Maybe I'm not what's right with the world. Maybe part of what's wrong in the world is at some point we are all equal at the foot of the cross. None of us are loved by God because we're great. We're loved by God because of what Jesus did on the cross. We should be patient. Are we patient? Are we willing to hear someone's story and their side? Are we gentle? Do we hold up signs and say we hate people? Do we curse at people and say God hates those kind of people? Are we kind? Do we make people smile? Do we make people feel like they matter? Do we seek peace? Or do we seek being right? Are we respectful? This is how not to be a jerk face. It's to go, I don't have all the answers. And that if I have a conviction that someone disagrees with, how could I be gentle and patient and peaceable? How can I be kind and listen to their story? I want to close with a true story. You probably don't know this person. I met him in Young Life. His name's Fletcher Martin. I met Fletcher Martin because he was on DC Young Life staff and I was on Young Life staff in kind of a suburban area. And we kind of would get together as a staff team. And Fletcher is a big guy. Fletcher's like 6'2", 6'3", probably 300 pounds. When you play basketball and go to the middle of the lane, you would realize that he was a tough dude. Like he was a big dude, but he was like a gentle teddy bear. And I remember one time we had to go to the staff event where all the staff were going in the local region. And I was catching a ride with the DC crew, which include Fletcher. And somehow we got on the conversation of politics and social and economics and race. And I was very opinionated. I was pretty young at the time. I think I was 25 or 26. And I had some pretty strong opinions on what I thought was right because I was right and everyone else was wrong. And I began to share my opinions in this car full of people. And Fletcher was, he was just a big dude. And what amazed me is that in that I remember that conversation today, even though it was 20 years ago, because of how he treated me. He was peaceable. He was kind. He was gentle. He didn't agree with me. And he represented his facts. And he represented truth. And as I had a friendship and as I knew Fletcher over the years, what continued to amaze me was how he treated me. When I was a jerk on the basketball court because all I cared about was winning, Fletcher would be like, hey man, really? But he never did. He could have crushed me. In my conversation, I remember to this day. And what moved me was not Fletcher's right arguments. It was how Fletcher treated me. And I bet to this day he doesn't know the impact that he had on my life. How I could see from a different vantage point, not because he argued better, not because he shouted louder, but because in spite of me being a jerkface, he didn't let my jerkface determine how he was going to treat me. And because he wasn't a jerkface, I grew and I learned. And I got to see people differently than I had before. He really modeled what Christ said when he said, love your enemy. Do good to those that would despise you and persecute you. If you only love those that are like you, how are you really any different? So at the end, if we want to answer the question how not to be a jerk face, we have to ask, what is our goal? Is it to be heard, or is it to give the care of Jesus? And only you can decide which of those you'll choose to do. Let me pray. Hey, God, thank you. We sang a song that said, when we were your foe, when we were your enemy, Jesus, you left the comforts of heaven. You got out from your insulated place and you came down and you were incarnate here on earth and you walked among us. And we were your enemy. You hung on the cross and you said, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they do. God, how could we not do what is done for us for others? God, help us to hear your words and for them not to just be good teachings, but for them to be things that we actually live out in a world that is in desperate need of peace and gentleness and kindness. May our goal be to represent you. This is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
If you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual journey or continue to support SouthPoint, you can connect to a small group, serve on a team, and give financially by clicking the box on the right. To watch other sermons from SouthPoint Church, click the playlist on the left. Click the logo to subscribe.